Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video is Magic and Spells in MYFAROG 4.0. So this is the third part of my ongoing series on this latest edition of MYFAROG. And in case you don't know, MYFAROG stands for the Mythic Fantasy Role-Playing Game. So as you can tell, there are 4 editions of this game, and there's really only minor differences between 3.3, which just came out several weeks ago, and 4.0, and those differences are, primarily just errata and the cover. The differences between 3.3 and 3.0 were a setting change and a number of game mechanic corrections or fixes or additions, subtractions, however you want to describe it. But this game system has certainly evolved over the span of these past 5 or slightly longer years, and it has improved, I believe, along the way, dramatically so. So, mechanically speaking, the magic system in this is different than in the 2.0 series and back further. So I think that you'll pick up on that if you're familiar with the system at all. But most of the changes are going to be in the combat system, which will be the next video that I attempt to tackle here. So without further ado, I'm going to go right into 4.0. You can see all the tabs are ready to just talk about the magic system itself and spells and curses and magic items. So I will go through the entire gambit of material that is in this. You have 4.0 if you have this cover. 3.3 is a previous cover, a very gray cover, with a creature coming out of a bog. So you'll know it from there as well. Let's get right to the book. So here we have it, and we're going to go to the very first tab here. And I wanted to talk about the character roles. So you can see for humans, you have bards, civilians, rangers, sorcerers, stalkers, tricksters, and warriors. Obviously, your spell casters here are bards, rangers, and sorcerers. And as we come down here, we'll also notice that dwarves gain the ability to cast spells at 2nd level, as do gnomes. So gnomes gain the ability at 2nd level as well. All of the elf variants, so elves, likewise gain the ability at 2nd level. Halflings do not. Bards begin 1st level with the ability to cast fairly weak spells. So I'll just read here. The bard can learn spells. A bard begins play knowing a weak spell known by his favorite deity. See sorcery official title is Skald or Skaldmay for female, and simply just bard, and so on. So they gain rangers. Rangers can learn spells, and we'll see that in the sorcery section that's down over here. Sorcerers obviously can cast spells, so sorcerers can learn fire and air spells. To learn earth spells, he must also have a positive strength. And what that means is a positive strength modifier, so at least a +1 in strength in order to be able to learn earth spells. To learn water spells, he must have a positive constitution, so a constitution +1 or higher. To learn a spirit spell, he must also have a positive charisma. If a sorcerer later on improves his attributes so that he qualifies to learn spells connected to other elements, he can, from then on, learn those spells too. A sorcerer begins play knowing any one weak spell that he's been able to learn. Okay, but there basically you have all of your character classes and your character races that can cast spells, and then when they can begin casting those spells. We're now going to come over and we're going to spend some time talking about bards first. So, bards dedicate their lives to serving the deities, and do so by imitating one of the deities, their favorite deity. They therefore have to dress like their favorite deity in order to gain favor with them, and cannot use weapons other than those traditionally used by their favorite deity. If they do not dress like their favorite deity, or if they use a weapon not traditionally used by those deities, they will lose their ability to cast spells for 1 full month. I'll try to let this get caught up here. I know it's a little bit blurry. There we go. Sorry about that. The female bard normally marry after years of serving their favorite deity, after 10 years, and until then they all must remain virgins. When they lose their virginity, they also lose their bard character role. See losing character role. So they no longer are a bard, and they become essentially a civilian. They may not lose their skills that they have; they'll just lose their ability to cast spells. All right, here they have a list of deities, the allowed weapons that they can have, and then the clothing in the sacred colors that bards must wear in order to maintain their ability to continue casting spells, at least for that upcoming month. The deities used to be impersonal and androgynous spirits who only later turned into deities, and even though they today are either male or female, to represent the deities, the male bards need to dress partly as women in robes, whilst female bards need to dress partly as men with men's clothing on the upper body. This custom is archaic, but still practiced. A level 1 bard knows by default one weak spell known by his favorite deity, but can learn a new spell every time he gains a new level, but must do so instead of gaining training in a new skill. He will learn the spell through prayer to his deities. Bards have no restrictions when it comes to the use of armor, but they must wear the traditional clothes in the sacred colors underneath or over their armor. Okay, so special to sorcerers. A sorcerer dresses up to look like a spirit of nature. He must wear robes and a brimless pointy hat, a large hood, pointy wide hat, a large hat with tassels, or a tight hat or hood. He does this to trick the spirits into believing that he too is a spirit, and this masquerade makes the spirits susceptible to being manipulated by the sorcerer. If a sorcerer does not wear his special clothes, the spirit will be scared away, and the sorcerer will not be able to cast spells until the next sunrise. A sorcerer cannot use shields or wear armor or helmets without disclosing to the spirits that he is not one of them. If he uses a shield, an armor, or a helmet, the spirits of nature will flee from him, rendering him unable to cast spells until the next sunrise. Sorcerers can only cast spells using a sorcerer's staff, which is basically a normal staff with a piece of orichalcum, I always struggle with that word, iron, bone, rock, bronze, electrum, gold, crystal, silver, pearl, or copper attached to one end. The type of material needed for the sorcerer's staff depends on the type of spells to be cast by the sorcerer. So the staff itself is not magical. The staff is a conduit for the sorcerer's magic. So in order to cast air spells, the staff must include orichalcum or iron. To cast earth spells, orichalcum, bone, or rock. To cast fire spells, orichalcum, bronze, electrum, or gold. Spirit spells, orichalcum, crystal, pearl, or rock. Water spells, orichalcum, copper, electrum, or silver. Now, I don't know when I have to find out, to clarify this point. If you have a staff where at one end there is just the orichalcum, does that mean that that staff can allow you to cast any of the spell types, or does it have to be other than air spells, orichalcum or iron, or is it orichalcum, bone, or rock, and so on? So I don't know if it's a common that has to be on all staffs, and then the other is a secondary. So that's something that I'll find out and clarify. And if you're watching through this and you're familiar with the, with the rules as well, please feel free to comment in there. If a sorcerer for some reason is able to learn dwarf, elf, gnome, or orc spells, he must still use his staff to cast them. And in relation to the materials needed of the staff to cast the spell, a dwarf, a gnome, or an orc spell is the same as earth spells, and an elf spell is the same as air, fire, or water. All right, so that's really an interesting thing, because these spell components aren't the physical spell components are aligned more with the types of spells, the elements of the spells, or the even the racial spells are tied to a particular element that I think matches very well when you think of the differences between dwarves, gnomes, and orcs, and elves, for that matter. So very interesting, and I like that setup. An exception to this rule is when sorcerer becomes... I'm sorry, I skipped a paragraph. A sorcerer can normally not use any sharp weapons capable of chopping or cutting down trees or other growths in nature. If he uses such a weapon, the spirits of nature will flee from him, rendering him unable to cast spells until the next sunrise. So the only weapons that he can use without penalty are clubs, flails, war flails, staves, hammers, wands, war hammers, maces, slings, staff slings, and rocks. All right. So if you were ever wondering why magic users in D&D could not use bladed weapons or sharp weapons or pointy weapons, for that matter, this might be the reason why, and that is going back to a more ancient folklorish traditional sorcery understanding that mythic fantasy role-playing game does, that perhaps D&D was kind of based on that, without them actually coming out and explicitly saying why that is. So that's just my conjecture, is that I believe that this is probably the connection as to why magic users in D&D cannot use sharp weapons. An exception to this rule is when a sorcerer becomes a making, see the high festivals, in which case he will also be allowed to use all swords without penalty. Note that this only applies to male sorcerers. Another exception to this rule is the sickle a sorcerer can use to gather herbs for potions. These blades need to be made from gold and have runes carved on them, lest they ruin the power of the herbs gathered. The runes must spell, and I can't pronounce these words, Linalukharsh. A capital R, I believe, is pronounced like an SH. From Proto-Thulian, Linalukos, meaning white linen clothing flower meadow. This formula makes sure that the herbs are not ruined when gathering. See the skill Alchemy. Sorcerers have an oral tradition, so no spells or other secret lore can be found in books or on scrolls. This is how the sorcerers protect themselves and their lore from the misuse of others, and also how they stay in power. A level 1 sorcerer knows by default one weak spell, but can learn a new spell every time he gains new level, but must do so instead of gaining a trained skill. He must do so from another sorcerer. This takes 1 day, or study all by himself. Sitting for 1 week on a mountaintop to learn air spells, in a dark cave to learn earth spells, by a fire for fire spells, on a burial mound under sacrificial tree for spirit spells, and by a sacred spring for water spells, whilst holding onto his staff. That is something that I find really unique and appealing about this magic system, is some of the conditions to learn new spells is just so connected to the spell type that the sorcerer is trying to learn. I just really find that a great model for other magic / spell systems that other games might want to consider doing, and that's to make that real connection to the type of spells and the activities that the spellcaster has to go through to learn new spells. The sorcerer sees himself as the ruler of the entire world, and his nails and his hair are seen as representations of the world's plants and other growths. Because of this, a sorcerer cannot cut his hair, nails, or beard without consequence. If he or someone else does so, he will forget all of his spells, that he has to learn them anew. This takes 1 day for each spell, and the spells must be relearned 1 spell at a time. The sorcerer loses no proficiency, but he cannot cast the spells again until he has learnt them anew. He can relearn these spells on his own and without any special aids save his staff. Sorcerers do not believe in gods or goddesses. They see themselves as the masters of everything in nature, and the sympathetic deities are to them but powerful spirits that they have yet to learn how to manipulate. Horses are seen as messengers of the deities, of these powerful and uncontrollable spirits, and because of this, they scare away the less powerful spirits manipulated by the sorcerers. So if a sorcerer as much as touches a horse, he will not be able to cast another spell until the next sunrise. Okay, so as you can see, there's a huge amount of detail and lore and just connectivity that bards and sorcerers have towards the magic that they can utilize. I wanted to come here and talk a little bit about alchemy. And so, alchemy, of course, is something that is directly connected to magic, especially a sorcerer's magic. And so here we have alchemy, and as you can see, its attribute is intelligence. And if you're untrained in alchemy, you're going to have a -5 to attempting to brew various potions. And there is there's a series of charts here that impact how long it takes you to find the herb and harvest it correctly. What are some of the modifications for actually generating the potions? How long does it take? And here they have potions that have expiration times. So a potion will stop working after a certain amount of time, which is an interesting element that, again, unique to this system. I've never seen it anywhere else. But if someone else uses that same concept, but it does kind of make sense that potions would have some kind of a shelf life before they become ineffective. So alchemy is used to brew and find the effects of potions. To brew a potion, a character must first cast a spell without fumbling to be able to store the effect in the potion. Each potion can hold 1 dose. When that has been done, the character tests his alchemy proficiency again, a DD, which is your target number, depending on the strength of the spell to be stored in the potion. The stronger the potion, the harder it is to brew. So you have a target number of a 12 for a week. So that's rolling a d20 and then having to, applying your intelligence modifier and then having to beat these numbers on that roll in order to store that particular spell's ability into a potion. So a 12 for weak, a 16 for normal, a 20 for strong spells, and a 24 for mighty spells. It takes d6 hours to gather and purify in the smoke of a fire the herbs needed for any potion. Only herbs gathered in white linen clothing for sorcerers using Sorcerer's Golden Sickle can be used to brew potions. See Special to Sorcerers. The character must gather and purify all of the herbs he needs before he can start brewing the potion. To find the effects of the potion just by examining it, test alchemy against a DD14. Potions lose their power and turn to vinegar after some time. You can use alchemy to find out approximately when a potion will lose its power. The DD to do this is 18. So you can look at a potion, and if you roll an 18, modified 18 obviously, or better, then you'll be able to tell just by looking at a potion how long it may last before it loses its effectiveness. Again, just a real new element to potions that I've never seen before in another game. And to be honest with you, I never focused this much on alchemy or magic. Playing MYFAROG for a number of years now, because I'm usually the myth master, and so running the games, and it's been rare if any of my players actually played sorcerers. They tended to play warriors or stalkers or tricksters or whatever. So yeah, and one time I ran a dwarf campaign but this was prior to dwarves actually being a playable class in in MYFAROG. So moving on, a character can never spend less than 1 hour to gather herbs. All right, and so it just goes into modifying how long it takes to actually gather the herbs needed. So coming here, we have two more skills that enhance or allow for spell usage. We have religious tradition. This is a charisma based skill, -5 if you're untrained in it. Religious tradition is a skill needed by bards and rangers who want to gain favor with the deities and learn to cast spells. The higher the religious tradition proficiency the character has, the more powerful spells that he can learn. Religious tradition is also used to lead religious ceremonies in the right way and see casting spells. Characters other than bards and rangers can perfectly well pick up religious tradition as a trained skill. They might not be able to make use of it, but at least they can more easily blend in and participate in religious high festivals if they so wish. And if a trickster, perhaps they can make others use of the skill too. Okay. Rune Lore. Rune Lore is the knowledge about sorcery, about secrets, the ability to recognize enchantments and spells, know their effects, and what triggers these. Rune Lore lets you understand enchanted items and figure out how to use them. If you are a spellcaster, other than a bard or a ranger, it should be your Rune Lore will also determine your ability to learn new spells. See sorcery. A Rune Lore proficiency of +1 or more also means the character can read and write runes. Runes and sunlight. So here's a common misconception that is cleared up here. You don't need to keep a rune away from sunlight to keep its power. The belief that you need this stems from a misunderstanding of what a rune really is. What they said in the historic past was that if a rune, a secret, is brought out into the daylight, i.e., the public eye, it will lose its force. It had, however, nothing to do with the rune's carvings. So, and this goes back to like the secrecy that sorcerers, really had kept around their ability for wielding magic. Never wrote it in books, never wrote it on scrolls, and so even if they are using runes to expose the understanding of a rune to the open eye, to just the general public, would render that particular rune powerless. Backfiring wands, a critical failure when trying to use an enchanted item might lead to catastrophic result. Perhaps a spell backfires, it affects the wielder or the item instead of the target, or even destroys the enchanted item itself. All right, so that's it about runes and religious tradition. I'm going to talk a little bit about enchantment here. And if an item is enchanted, cast dice to see what kind of enchantment it has. All right, so it can have a +1 modifier or a spell, a weak spell, a +2 modifier or a normal spell, a +3 modifier or a strong spell, or a +4 modifier and a mighty spell. On a D6, on a 1 to 3 on a D6, it has a mod. On a 4 to 6, it has a spell. A spell item can be used once per day. Rune Lore DD12 to use for weak spells, 14 for normal spells, 16 for strong spells, and an 18 for mighty spells. So even if you had this item, if you don't have Rune Lore, you may not be able to cast this item. Remember, Rune Lore, if it's untrained, you have a -5 to begin with. And so you might have an item that you don't understand and you can't possibly use if you're not trained in it. All right, so that's a pretty interesting thing as well about magic items. The item is cursed. Some horrible and sinister spirit resides in it. When claimed by someone, that someone will immediately lose 6 Haminya points. That's their honor points. To sell or give away, or as he should, destroy the item and let others do the same. The user must test fortitude against a DD18, which means basically you're going to probably fail that, to be able to. All right, so you get a cursed item, and you will immediately lose whatever honor points that you might have. To sell or give it away, or as he should, destroy the item or let the others do the same, the user must test a fortitude against a DD18. So very hard to give up this cursed item, even though, or certainly destroy it. It just goes against their ability to let it go, basically. The Myth Master can also come up with more elaborate curses for cursed items if he so wishes, like a sword that must kill a man every time it is drawn from the scabbard and refuses to be sheathed again until it has, or a helmet that makes the wearer become paranoid and see everyone else as a threat. The imagination is the only limit. Okay, so a few interesting things about magic items. Special treasures, I know I can't really get here, but they do have, the game does have a number of what would be called like artifacts. All right, so you have the tools of Loci, and I'll go to a different page so you can see it a little bit better. So we have the Stone of Destiny, and the type of item is simple oblong block or red sandstone. It weighs 1,700 pounds. All right, so it's not something you're carrying in your pocket. The Stone of Destiny was located at the center of the Stonehenge in Highstead. It holds great power and mystery and was sacred to all the tribes of, I think it's pronounced Perthinio. All of the kings in Perthinio were crowned on this stone, and if there was war, the warring tribes would cease all hostility until the coronation was over. All right, and so it gives the properties and such. So there are, obviously some stone, some magic artifacts that are immovable objects, and others are such as we have here, the Bow of Ivar. Not actually a bow of, not actually the bow of Hodor, alias Ivar. The bow was called by that name because it was good. It was said to have been good enough even for Hodor. It's a self bow, short bow, weight 1 MA. Not sure what that means. Properties, it does D6 minimum strength. You cannot have a negative modifier on your strength to use it. It's -1 +3, -1 for causing cuts, +3 for causing shock, -1 means that it's easier to cause a cut, harder to make a shock. Roll. Mod. Base range is 50. Its real value is 1 gold piece. All right, so not an incredibly weapon. Kind of interesting. But there's a number of different artifacts in here and named items. Curses and gifts. So there are a variety of curses and gifts that are divine curses and divine gifts, and you can see here a divine curse is gravely insults the deity, steal from or desecrate a temple dedicated to the deity. So these are the causes. A divine gift is to perform a special task for the deity or simply be very useful for the deity or become powerful, level 12, and very beautiful and 18 or greater charisma. And you may receive a divine gift. And there are Enten curses, nymph gifts, and troll curses. And so these are all just other elements of magic in the system where you can receive various curses and gifts from either deities or other powerful spiritual type creatures in the world. We now get to the real meat of the magic system, and that is actually casting spells. So when we take a look here, it goes through a definition of a sorcerer and where the term originates from. So it's another nice piece that that Varg has done in the book, is that he kind of shows the context of words and where they come from. But casting a spellcaster can cast spells by Galdr, which means singing songs or citing poetic spell formulas, and by drawing symbols in the air, on the ground, in the wood, or elsewhere. The spell proficiency of a dwarf, elf, gnome, or sorcerer is always the same as his rune lore proficiency. The spell proficiency of a bard ranger is always the same as his religious tradition proficiency. A half-elf bard or a half-elf ranger, if he otherwise qualifies for it, also learn and cast elf spells normally, and if he does, the use of rune lore or his spell proficiency for the spells. Dwarves, elves, and gnomes are able to cast spells. They have no restrictions on the use of weapons or armor. All right. In order to cast a spell, the sorcerer, but not the dwarf, elf, or gnome, needs a sorcerer's staff to attract and manipulate the spirits of nature to channel their powers. Without this staff, the sorcerer cannot cast spells at all. Bards and rangers must use a wand, a branch from a sacred tree growing in a temple, when casting spells to channel the powers of their deities. All half-elf sorcerers have the same restrictions as high-men sorcerers, but not in relation to any elf spells they may know. The number of times each known spell can be cast every day from sunrise to sunrise is the same as the caster's charisma for bards and rangers, or intelligence for all others. If a spellcaster has only a +0 or even a negative attribute modifier, he will not be able to cast spells until he improves his relevant attribute. That means that if he gets knocked down for whatever reason to a lower level of intelligence or charisma, he would not be able to do that. All spells are either weak, normal, strong, or mighty. A spellcaster has a limit to how powerful spells they can learn, and even if they can And even if they learn a weak spell, they need to learn the same spell again to also be able to cast it as a normal spell, and then again to cast it as a strong spell. So let's say you're learning the spell Bird Song. All right, you're an elf. That's an elvish spell, and you're learning Bird Song. You learn the spell first as a weak, then you have to relearn the spell as normal strength, relearn it again as strong, and then relearn it again finally as mighty. Okay? So, an optional rule here is that the sacred bow, a wand, only works in relation to spells known by the deities who regard the tree it was taken from as sacred. So that's an optional rule that you can add to make the wand have to come from a particular tree revered by that individual deity. Let's go back to the number of spells here. So spellcasters can learn a maximum of intelligence times 6 individual spells, or intelligence times 4 for rangers, regardless of the type of spell. If he knows the maximum number of spells he is allowed to know, he can choose to forget spells in order to make room for other spells he wishes to learn instead. The spell will then be forgotten, though if he, for some reason, wishes to learn the same spell later on, he must do so if he learned a new spell. All right, so he has to relearn a spell that he has elected to forget. Bards and rangers can more easily learn spells known by their favorite deity than those known by friendly deities or other deities. Okay. And they go here, and it gives you a chart on how many spells or how many spell points. So minimum spell proficiency to learn spells that are. So a bard can learn, it takes 1, 4, or 6, or 8 for spells known of the favorite deity. All right. 2, 6, 8 for spells known to a friendly deity. So it limits how many spells they can know based on the deity. So their favorite deity, they can know 1 weak, 4 normal, and 6 strong. All right, and only 8 mighty, and so on. If they cannot know a mighty spell of a friendly deity or other deity. Dwarves, and they're kind of across the board, not tied. So dwarves, elves, and gnomes, not tied to deities. Rangers, again, tied to deities. Sorcerers are tied to no deities again. So 1 weak, 4 normal, 6 strong, 8 mighty. Okay. Then we get into, the various types of spells. So you have elf spells, you have dwarf spells. Down here are gnome spells. Orc spells, and they tell you what level the spell is. So Black Sky is only a normal level spell. Fear of the Dark, they can learn it as weak and then again as normal. Goblin Runes, weak and normal. Orcish Healing, weak and normal. I'm looking to find if they have any, or orcs do not have any mighty spells. But if you go back over here to gnomes, you can see that gnomes can have mighty level spells, such as invisibility, such as mirror image, such as maze. So you see, gnomes have a lot of illusionary type spells. And again, that's kind of a connection to D&D that you might be familiar with, where gnomes actually did make excellent illusionists. Orc spells are obviously much more combat or damage dealing oriented, or summoning for summoning creatures to come to their aid. Air spells are again elemental, and so any can learn those outside of their own discipline. All they need to do is make sure that their staff has the proper elements attached to it in order to do that. So you have air spells, you have earth spells, you're going to have fire spells. You have wind, or actually, why they have wind and waves? Oh, water spells, and then spirit spells here. And that's finally it for the spells. So as you can see here, the system is really, in my opinion, interesting. There are elements in it that I haven't seen before. The It's well thought out how everything kind of plays into it, and how each component of the magic system here is kind of related and tied to the others. So really interesting stuff. And if you have any comments about this, if you have any corrections from what I got over, or what I interpreted, please feel free to leave that in the comments section. And just like the combat system, I'm looking forward to testing out. I'm really looking forward to testing out the magic system here and see how it works in this newest edition of the game. Like I said, I have no past experience of using spells, either as a player or as a myth master, a GM of my games. My players just never actually used them. So I think that this system makes it much more open for players to say, you know what, I am going to play a bard or a ranger, even though the attributes necessary, and some of the birth requirements are quite high for those. Sorcerers are actually much more open than either a ranger or a bard. And you have to get lucky on the dice rolls to get any of the demi-human races as well. But it's certainly possible. Or you as a Mythmaster can always decide, I'm going to let you play one of these classes, and then just modify what they needed to do, or give them the minimums required in order to play the characters that they wanted to play. So once again, thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing, and continue watching. Hit the alert bell so that you'll get new uploads. I am going to do several more videos in this series, so be on the lookout for those over the next couple weeks. Like I said, this was a pretty big tackle. The magic system and the combat system is coming up next. In this series of videos, I might throw in a different video just to break things up, but combat is coming up next, and be on the lookout for that. And once again, thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day, and just happy gaming out there. I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. Take care.